All right. How is everyone doing? Welcome to the Cubicle Liberation Podcast. I'm Joshua Fletcher or Fletch. I'm here with David Hood. And today we are going to continue to explore and have a conversation about effective decision making. And or a couple of the things that this is really going to help people do is if you're still in a cubicle and you're looking to maybe navigate your way out of it, really at the root of that, the engine that's going to help you drive effectively to a different location is the decision-making process. And there are probably, umpteen million books and frameworks and things like that out there. But really understanding some key distinctions about effective decision-making that you may not have thought about before is going to really help you be much more reliably effective in your decision making, which is going to be able to help you get from where you are to where you want to be by taking incremental steps along the way that are really based on decisions and distinctions. So, David, thank you for bringing this topic up and fleshing it out. Do you have anything that you want to maybe jump into and lead off with to get the topic started this morning?
Yeah, thanks. I think that this is also going to help if you're looking to pivot your business. We also look at this a lot like kind of a protection against FOMO and shiny object syndrome, which is a really big deal in our industry.
Yeah, and FOMO stands for, it's FOMO, fear of missing out.
Yes, yep. Which is a really big thing that can send you down a lot of bad paths and keep you have a pretty substantial lack of focus. But as Fletch pointed out, like decision making it's so important. The processes by which you make your decisions are going to determine the quality of the decisions.
Yeah, and one of the things that kind of sets the stage for us, like to look at this, I think maybe from our perspective a little differently than other people might, is a background in marketing. Like really, what marketing is about is influence, and so, because we're a little more well-armed, so to speak, on the influence topics, we understand things that affect decision-making, right? And so having kind of that background or that framework or that understanding foundation a little bit to launch off of, it's going to be very helpful if you don't already have that, because understanding the things and the conditions that we can employ to help people make decisions, right? That's kind of what influence means, is it's probably a lot more powerful than you realize.
Yeah.
So now where were we gonna start, David?
So kind of the one of the purposes of this is to kind of give you some tools and strategies and perspectives and kind of a framework for decision making. So I think we should start with the framework that we have here. So this is not like it's sort of like a step-by-step, but not quite like a step-by-step. It's sort of like, okay, here are some things and steps that you can do to start figuring out, should you go or should you stay? Or if you're choosing between two different paths, which one makes the most sense? Which one is more optimal for you and you living a good quality life, the life that you want to live or that you should live, whichever one makes most sense. So, we have here in the framework, you pointed out, kind of start where you are. I think acknowledging where you're at and really looking at that, and maybe staying in your cubicle job is actually best for you. So really taking a good look at that and looking at what makes sense for you. But me,
oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, pause. No, to me, one of the things that is going to create a situation where you want to be somewhere else, right? So if you're listening to this, there's obviously, you've either got a lot of free time or you're looking for something different, right? And being armed or understanding the method or the mechanism to getting a different experience of life is really the power to not be stuck. And the root of kind of, where cubicle liberation came from is like people that are in a cubicle, right? The essence of like being liberated from that is they feel stuck in the cubicle, right? But you're not, right? And I think all of us understand that we have an inherent power to not be stuck, but we don't understand the nature of it. And what we're going to explore here is kind of the nature of not getting stuck. And with decisions, there are a couple different ways of getting stuck, right? one of them is not really knowing where to start, right? There's so many choices, there's so many decisions. And so it's like, well, you start where you are, right? If you're in a cubicle, if you are in a relationship, if you're in a financial position that you don't really, care for, acknowledging, I say reality, so to speak. There's a lot of different ways of even understanding reality, but like saying, I want to have a business, but I have this job, so I can't ever get there. You feel cut off from it, right? You feel completely stuck. And so one of the things that I want to kind of explore a little more and help people see more clearly is that even massive changes in your life are taken really one step at a time, right? A very small incremental, kind of click in a different direction played out over time creates a very different result. And, maybe David, you can jump in with the method you use to start these with the big questions and things.
Yeah.
Kind of
so
talk about that.
After you kind of look at where you are, I think that you got to kind of start asking yourself what I would consider to be kind of like big picture questions. And I've got a list down here. So some sample big picture questions. This is definitely not exhaustive. But first of all, everything comes down to kind of like all roads lead to, how do you really even know what is a process to identify what's true versus what's false versus what you can't know or what's unknown. And that's a whole 10-part podcast in and of itself. That's really important. And Fletch pointed out, like, one of the biggest factors here, if not the major driving factor of a lot of the misunderstanding and misinformation out there, is kind of a confirmation bias. So, you look to confirm what you already believe. This is why I think in the United States, we have two really, we're so split. You have the media of different types and people who, feel a certain way, they watch media that confirms that, and feel another way, they watch media that confirms that. That's what a lot of people do.
And it's interesting that what they watch to confirm is in all likelihood what they watched to start believing. And so this is where people can get stuck a little bit in not really seeing, if you walk a path enough, that path starts to get beaten down. And the more the path gets beaten down, the walls tend to get higher and it's harder to see anything else, right? It's kind of the nature of confirmation bias in the mind. The more you walk that path, it's very difficult to see other things after a while.
So I think just being aware of, what you want to believe and trying to be skeptical about your own beliefs, I think is a good first step there. So let's assume that you have some processes. You've been listening to this podcast for a while, so you have some kind of processes and ideas on how to do that. Fletch, you pointed out, like, how do you know what's important and what's good? Can you talk to those two things?
Yes. Let me think about where to start with it. So one of the things, like, importance is such a topic that's overlooked. Like, many people would, if they had to look at the life they're living, like currently, like what you did yesterday, what you spent your time, right, working on, so to speak. At any given time, big picture wise, say you're working a job and you've got kids and, family that you got to spend time with. You may spend, say, 8 hours at work, another 2 hours getting ready from and traveling to or from work, although that might have changed recently with the lockdown. But just say there's 10 hours there, right? You got 2-3 hours that you're spending with your family and kids. Maybe you got, if you're like typical Americans, especially nowadays, there's TV and entertainment that comes in every day. And those things in one way or another are important, right? So we need to more clearly understand what importance means, right? And it's the type of thing that has an impact on your life. That's a equivalent term, right? So it's like, what's important? Well, it's something that's going to have an impact. Now, the reason I like to use the word impact over importance, although importance is kind of the main concept, is that if you've organized your life in such a way where you've got, like, goals, and you've got a job, you've got a family, you've got kids, you've got maybe some exercise you want to do every day, if somebody stops you and says, hey, what's the most important thing to you? It's like, well, oh, my kids. Well, then why are you at work? It's like, well, you need to have a way of having a framework to approach life where it makes sense for you to be at work when you're at work, and it makes sense for you to be with your family when you're with your family, and it makes sense for you to be exercising when you exercise. It's kind of obvious that there are maybe multiple things that are important, but we need to have an understanding of like priorities and boundaries and thresholds, right? So it might seem unimportant to approach life differently in that regard, but it has a massive impact over time. And so we can now start to look at that more differently, in that when you're at work, just say, because we're running Cubicle Liberation, say you're at work, it's the most impactful thing that you can do while you're at work is to work without distraction. And so getting other screens, other nonsense, other notifications out of the way, maybe having some like, airplane or like sleep mode or something, like do not disturb mode, where like your phone doesn't even send you notifications unless, they're of a certain sort. We can understand that over time, approaching your work that way is going to impact your effectiveness at work considerably versus what's the alternative? Well, my kids are really important. I haven't spent any time with my wife or husband. I'm getting fat. I'm not exercising. And continuing to run all that stuff in your head the whole time you're in a cubicle, it's like you don't have an effective threshold to say, hey, mind, I got that. I've organized my life in such a way to understand my priorities, the things that have impact, where those boundaries are. And I've approached this in a way where this makes sense for right now for me to really give all of my focus, attention, and immerse myself in this topic. Like generally across the board, that's something I see massively affecting lots and lots and lots of people.
Yeah, you only have so much time, and everything can't be important, right? Because you can't apply your resources, your life resources, be it money or your time or your energy, everything. So you have to pick and choose.
We talked about the other day, like how many opportunities you miss. It's just, there's no way to ever take advantage of, so to speak, all of these opportunities, right? We talked about the fear of missing out a little bit on one of the other podcasts. Understanding that, one of the reasons we set the stage with that is to realize you can't possibly run with everything. You can't possibly make money with every, position in the stock market. Okay. So just get rid of that model of approaching things like, oh, I'm going to miss out on something.
Yeah.
Right. The only things you really want to make sure you don't miss out on is something that might completely wipe you out of the game. Right. So if you're so unhealthy that you die prematurely, right. Or that you don't have enough energy or, wherewithal to accomplish a certain thing, right? You need to maintain your health over that threshold, right? But what's perfect health? I don't know. Maybe there's a definition that makes sense, but there are a lot of people who are like, oh, I'm always going to get healthier and healthier. That might be wasted resources, right? If you're spending too much time trying to chase health when the impact of doing so is going to be very, very small versus those extra resources you're putting toward health going elsewhere. And the reason I'm kind of talking about that framework again and kind of bringing it back up is that it's a very different approach than most people I know kind of how they do things. But from implementing that in my life and now having that in place and now running a decision-making process, it's much easier to have clarity in, oh, it's clearly better to do that in this situation, in this scenario. And so kind of circling back around and understanding like importance and impact, it's very impactful to be able to fully immerse yourself and focus on important things when they're important, or not focus on important things, period. Yeah. And then also having a way to switch and take care of the other important things in your life when it's appropriate.
So like my thoughts on this would be that it's kind of it's a deep subject, and part of how do you know what's important we're covering in the other questions and the other parts of the strategy of this podcast. And also for me, like a shortcut that helps me is I spend a lot of time working on it, and then I develop priorities, and then I can run my important when I'm thinking about to myself, what's really important here? Is it I have two things that I can do. I only have time or energy to do one of them. Which one's more important? I run it by my priorities. So it's sort of like a shortcut in the moment where I can make decisions on what's important. What do you think about, so how do you know what's good? This is like the big philosophical religious question. I don't really want to go too deep into it here, but knowing what's good, what is your quick thoughts on this, Fletch, on this question?
It comes from happiness. It's very much related to happiness, and happiness not being you've got to also kind of understand happiness in an uncorrupted way, because like the thing that my mind wants to shift to, I think maybe other people's will as well. It's like, well, what if you've got some kind of messy brain condition, and it it makes you happy to hurt children or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So, well, is it good to hurt children? It's kind of like, without descending too deeply into just really fleshing that out, it's like, well, no. Why? Well, because if we all hurt children, that we're going to have a really messy, like that's not something like pleasure and happiness are different, right?
Yeah.
Pleasure is really related to like what we already want, right? It feels like, oh man, I really want to steal that, that jewelry or whatever, right? And we can really want it. It doesn't mean that that's good, right? So creating a distinction between like pleasure and good is really important. Without, well, so there's the whole topic, and one of the reasons why like we can't chase pleasure is that pleasure is based on what we want, and what we want changes based on our situation all the time.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. This is the next question on here.
Yeah. Right. So these are all, we're kind of like, blah, like here it all is, right? We've already talked about some of these and set the stage to at least have some framework in this one, and continuing to explore it. But I'm fully aware that each of these need to be fully fleshed out and defined more properly.
And they build on each other, so it's not like we can just go one at a time.
You can't just talk about one, because if we just sat here and talked about like goodness in a vacuum, so to speak, it would be really hard to see it as important, because you wouldn't understand what it can impact.
Yeah, it's sort of like these, like when I first started building this list, I started with, well, what do you really want in life? And Fletch was sort of like, oh, wait, hold on, let's step back. Because
is that always the place to start? Yeah.
Right. Well, because he brought up a good point, which is like, what you want maybe not be what you should want, right? Like maybe what you want right now is not good for you. Maybe it won't lead to happiness for you or your family. And so, we had to take a step back and look at, okay, so what do you want? Okay. But also kind of like there's different perspectives to like, what should you want? If you look at like the long term, the wholeness of your life, what's going to be good for you, what's going to be good for your family, what's going to be good for society as a whole, stuff like that. Those are all filters that you should try to apply to what you really want. And so that's part of why we're starting with, okay, how do you know what's true? How do you know what's important? How do you know what's good? This is, again, each one of these three questions could kind of be its own podcast series in and of itself. So sorry to interrupt, but it's kind of like,
no, I'm glad you did. Yeah. This is, you might be able to tell just from like David and I have a lot of overlap, right? In our framework and understanding how we approach life just in general. And then we've also got a lot that doesn't overlap.
Mm-hmm.
And the nature of us kind of doing 2-man podcast is such that you've got enough to overlap to talk together about topics, but then we've also got kind of our own understanding and framework that lies outside of the other person's kind of circles, right? And so in that way, that conversation is a little, there's likely a lot of benefits to having stuff that David understands clearly, and it works very well, and it is something he can talk about, and things that conversely I have that, and those are mutually exclusive to a degree.
Yeah, no, it's definitely helped me. There's times where I start with something and you bring up something like, oh yeah, that's right, I hadn't thought about it like that. So
and so kind of getting back to the, okay, well, like, start with what you want. Okay, yeah, you can start there, but as David started there, my mind immediately was like, what if I don't know what I want? What if what I want is not necessarily going to lead me to something that's good?
mm-hmm.
And I think about, like, in my own life, my own experience, there were times that I put a lot of effort and resources into achieving goals that really didn't bring me much goodness. They really weren't things that radically made conditions in my life or the lives of the people around me that much better. But I sunk tons of resources into them. And I did that because I wanted them so badly. And in retrospect, getting some distance from them, I was able to identify and realize, oh, actually doing, like, asking yourself what you want and then taking massive action to achieve it is a failure condition. There are failure conditions cooked into that, which are, you may want the wrong things. Absolutely. I say the wrong, even if you're just being totally selfish, right? You may have been triggered and set up in such a way with the life that you've lived to be attenuated and focused on this objective that you believe is going to be the be all end all, happiness forever and always for everyone. And just in those saying those things, I have a feeling that most people's goals are not aligned with that. It's achieved forever. There's no more bad in the world. Everyone is happy. Like, people don't have that as a goal.
And as you pointed out, it's not even just about, like, even if you look at it from a purely selfish standpoint of, I mean, not that's necessarily selfish, but just like, what is good for me? Like, what do I want? And even you might be wrong about that. So you gotta be able to evaluate, not so much what you want in the moment, but what the wholeness of your life and your experience and your overall happiness is going to come from. And that is really more what you should want. It's not about like, oh, well, you should want to, I don't know, have kids, and you should want to, what other people think you should want. That's not really what we're saying here. We're saying what you should want from your own personal perspective of the kind of the full arc of your life.
Yeah. Well, and this word that's in here a lot in our language and in the sheet, the word should.
Yeah.
Until that is understood clearly, it can really jack you up as far as changing what it feels like is important. Because there's a moral obligation component to the word should. So saying, what do you want versus what should you want? What's the difference in those two? Like, questions, or like, let me consider those. What do I want? Or what should I want? We can, like, even kind of at a really base level, we can realize those are very different questions. The only difference is should. Okay, well, what's the nature of that should? Like, what does that mean? Well, maybe there is some sort of moral obligation to create more good, or to at least get rid of bad. Why? Well, if it's something I should, it can feel like someone else is enforcing it upon me, but it can also come out of myself like, well, I actually should want to do something that's going to turn out better for me. That has nothing to do with outside influences. Okay. So it's not just enforced. Like, I've got to be, like, I'm somehow, I owe it to everyone else to do good for them. But it's not that at all, because what should I do, or what should I want to do, might only be about myself. Like, I should want to do something that makes me healthier, or that gets me done with money forever, or that lets me approach relationships in a way that builds them over time versus destroys them. That's a very personal. So that word should is a friggin' loaded, massively impactful term. And the more you use it in your life and notice that you're using it, you can help catch your mind doing something that may be misleading you.
Yeah. And I think, again, like I mentioned this several times and in different contexts and other podcasts, I think a really useful kind of process or a really useful question. There's actually a book called, I think it's called How Do You Want to Measure Your Life? I think that the implication there is looking at the fullness of your life, and going from wherever you are now to, let's say you live to be, let's say you're younger than 80 and you live to be 80, however long that is right now, you live to be 85 or whatever. So what do you want out of that? And taking a really long-term perspective and working backwards from that. I think that's a pretty useful way. That's a pretty useful question. And I think it's a pretty useful process for going about figuring out not just what you do want, but what you should want for you and your life. And I think it helps identify these other questions or explore these other questions. What's truly important to you? Because you look at the long term of your life, and it kind of puts things in perspective. So I think those are going to help you understand, what's good to you. It's going to help you figure out, if you're currently wanting the right things, it's going to help you figure out what's important. So I'm a big fan of this question. Kind of, how do you not so much measure your life? Maybe that's not the best term, but it's just like, what kind of life do you want to lead? What kind of, when all's said and done, when you're in the last day of your life and you're looking back on your life, what do you want to see? What do you want to remember?
Yeah. I've indulged in that sort of exploration, I guess, a lot. Not a lot, enough that I think there's value in that it helps us not singularly have a perspective of, well, what's going to make me happy immediately, right? Because the answer to that question is almost always going to be, well, depending on what you've got going on. Like, I'm thinking of things like, oh, I can achieve happiness or chill or whatever, like nearly immediately with a distraction, right? I say distract, like alcohol, right? Or TV program.
TV, drugs, alcohol.
Yeah, it's just there. We can kind of see, like, well, if I continue to operate that way, it's pretty easy to see I'm not going to continue to build goodness into my life or just the world in general over any significant length of time.
Yeah.
So if like that exercise, that perspective can help get you out of that immediate, like what's going to help make the most impact now. And there are other people who say, well, that's exactly what you need to do. You need to think about what you can do right now to change your situation, right? But you've got to look at it from a completely different framework to have that be a valid approach at all. Which, like, if you're I say different framework, what you need to have are boundaries of things that you realize are not going to be helpful, that you're not going to consider, right? So if you're not going to consider alcohol, drugs, TV, cruising, social media, if you're not going to consider those things and you say, okay, well, what could I do right this minute that would have the biggest impact on my business? Well, now, that could be really helpful.
Yeah,
right?
That's actually,
but you've got to have those boundaries in place, those thresholds, right?
Yeah.
Those things that you're not willing, that you've already explored and you understand are not going to lead you where you want to go. Yeah. And so it's kind of interesting. That's like, well, okay, you need to look, like, think of this. There's like some parable that comes from Asia, I believe, maybe Japan. And it's about like planting trees. And there's like an old man. I can't remember exactly how it goes, but there's like an old man planting a tree that's going to take, like 100 years or something to mature. He's like, well, why do you do this? He's like, well, this is the thing that's going to be most impactful for me to do today. Even though the man may not, live to see the fruits of its labor, of his labor, so to speak, right? Because it won't even mature to bear fruit, so to speak, until he won't be the person necessarily receiving those fruits. He also understands, well, with what I've got right now and where I am, this is something that's impactful, just in general. This is something I can do, that I can control, that's good, that's enjoyable. It's enjoyable because I understand it's impactful and important in general. I probably butchered the parable. There's probably a lot more meaning and clarity you could get from it if I would have remembered it properly. But
there's also there's a Chinese parable that I'm going to get it wrong, but like, if you want to be happy for like an afternoon, take a nap. If you want to be happy and the time length goes further and further, but the point is, like, you can do things that make you happy now, but that isn't necessarily going to create the best life for you. But
you've got to figure out a way to be happy now.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is the rub. So this is like, okay, you've got to understand enough to be able to engineer a way that where you create conditions where you want to do the things you should want to do.
Yeah.
It's kind of a little bit of a mouthful here, but that's kind of the essence of a really of a method that works to build from where you are to get to where you want to go. And that's kind of the essence of this decision making. Because if you don't account for each of those things, if you don't account for the fact, oh, well, you just need discipline. Like, understand what discipline is even. Like, discipline means that you're wanting to do something else, but you're deciding to stay on the track. Well, what's the nature of you wanting to do something else? Like, what's that about? Maybe it'd be easier to just figure out, like, maybe you shouldn't want to do that other thing at all. Like, if you can dissolve the desire to do that, you don't now have to use discipline at all. You can use more of your resources to actually accomplish the goal, right? So this is kind of what I'm talking about, like engineering conditions where it's where there are, well, engineering in such a way where there are less failure conditions present. And one of the one that we kind of dropped off into this whole thing with was, it's a failure condition if you don't understand what's important. It's a failure condition if you're being led by emotions, what you want, right? Because we can see clearly in each of those kind of explorations, they can lead to a very bad place. Okay, so if they can lead to a bad place, we need a distinction. The distinction is, like, here's what seems like a contradiction, or not an oxymoron, like a paradox, right? So it's like, I can't let emotions lead what I do with my life. But I also have to acknowledge that if I continue to fight against my emotions, I'm going to lose, like, overall.
Well, it's some emotions are useful. I think there's some instinctual understanding that you get that you can't necessarily intellectually understand right away. So, for example, like choosing who you marry, that's an emotional decision, right? And rightfully so. It can be an intellectual decision as well, but so I don't think putting emotions in their proper place and not letting them rule the roost is, in terms of making completely all emotional decisions, is a good thing.
Yeah, they're powerful and they're important. Exactly. So they're powerful and they're important. It's true that they are powerful, right? So we can say that.
Mm-hmm.
Because of that, we need to account for it. We need to engineer, considering that that's going to be a load or a stress on this building that we're going to call our life over time, right? And so kind of circling that back around to, okay, decision making, how does this affect shiny object syndrome? Well, if you put yourself in a condition where you're reading a bunch of offers that people are sending you through email or through commercials on a TV program that you like, if you're putting yourself in a situation where where you're continually assessing whether or not that's important or whether you want it, that is a failure condition just by itself. If you're constantly putting yourself in the crosshairs, so to speak, of marketing, which is someone else's priority,
mm-hmm.
you're going to wind up getting hit.
Unsubscribe from bad email lists. Don't buy cookies at the store, so when you're at home, you don't have to resist eating the cookies.
Yeah. If
Kind of
they're
what you're
not at
saying.
the house, then you may not even think of it. Like it's
Yeah.
countless times, one of my kids will come up, and I use my kids as an example just because they've helped me understand a lot more about how I operate, because I don't, we're just all big kids. If you believe you're different, you need to have a reason why. At what point in your life did everything change and now you're an adult? You have a whole different model of processing
Really good.
information,
Yeah.
right? And so they might
Definitely
see,
some big kids who are really old.
yeah, and very powerful.
Yes.
Very, I want this now kind of thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The number of times where they say, they'll come in and they say, oh, I want a waffle. I'm like, it's kind of random out of the blue. I listen, and it was on Teen Titans Go, right? Or
Right.
some cartoon.
Oh no, that's
There's
so
a message.
true.
It's like, oh, I do want a waffle. Why? Oh, because I just saw it on TV. Okay. Oh, you silly little kid. Just wait till you grow up. It'll all be different. No, not at all.
No, you'll still want waffles when
You'll
you see.
still want I want a waffle now. Thank you for bringing this
So
up, Vivian.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry for those of you who want waffles.
Yeah,
Salad,
we introduced
very
that.
young. There's lots of things you can put on salads that are actually quite delicious, and focusing on that can help you eat salads. Salads can be delicious and satisfying.
Yeah. So then the nature of making good decisions is not making a bunch of unimportant decisions.
Avoiding that's a good point. Yeah. Setting up processes and systems in your life where you don't have to make those,
where you're really working
decisions.
on only important, impactful things, right?
Or as much as optimizing that to as best you can.
Yeah.
There's going to be unimportant ones that are probably going to pop up, and there's
sure. We kind of notice that, and then if it's going to be something that completely takes us out, maybe we need to adjust it. If driving to work every day takes you past driving to work takes you past a bunch of donut and sweet coffee places, and that over time it's going to wreck you. And driving home from work is taking you past a bunch of bars and fast food restaurants, and over time that's going to wreck you. You need to either find a different way to work, or move, or like something.
Yep.
If you're using all of your mental wherewithal, emotional resistance to just say no to that stuff, you're going to wind up saying yes to some other things that might even be worse for you.
There's literally willpower is literally sort of like a muscle. You do want to work on it to some degree, but as you wake up every morning, you have a certain amount of it, and it goes down over the day.
Yeah, it can increase, but it's not infinite. You can't
that's correct.
You can't use it all the time. Yeah.
And there's each day you start with a certain amount, and when you run out, then you have very little willpower, which is why the things that you want to do, the things you don't want to do that you feel like you need to do earlier on in the day, typically. Okay. So we spent a lot of time on this part of the framework, asking big questions. This is it's appropriate, I think, for us to spend a lot of time on it, and maybe I'm sure we'll come back to it in this podcast and another podcast. But to me, also, it's not just asking them once, then you never need to ask them again. I think you should ask the questions at least once a year, or sit down for an afternoon or more. And you kind of can't do this. You could do this too much if this is all that you did, but if you did it once a month, that wouldn't be a problem. In fact, it might be better. Because sometimes your answers change, and sometimes you have new information. Sometimes you have new context. The situation changes. And so there's a lot of new questions that could pop up, and there's a lot of new answers. And so this is not a one-time thing. I actually enjoy doing this, so I try to do this often. I think I kind of naturally do it a lot of the time, just kind of thinking about big questions all the time as I'm driving around or whatever, just kind of randomly. It's pretty useful.
Yeah. The nature of like the mind, there's something really helpful to me that that David Mills said, and I think just in passing, I may have even mentioned it on one of these podcasts before, but your mind is, kind of it's its own thing. It's a thing, right? Your mind does certain things. I say on its own, so to speak. It just runs, and it's a machine, and a very complicated one at that. If you don't let it kind of be its own machine some of the time, then it's gonna just overwhelm you. Like if you're constantly trying to like shoehorn more information, like I got myself into a situation maybe 4 or 5 years ago where I literally did not let my brain do any thinking. It was probably more than that. So I was trying to learn a lot because I was getting into digital marketing more. I was trying to understand information marketing. Search engine optimization was something I was evolving and trying to grow my understanding of. I was into social media marketing and paid ads. I was exploring law of implication and how the mind works. And I had 3 kids and a wife and a couple friends that I saw every once in a while. There was never a moment in the day where I was not ingesting something, ingesting media, engaging in a conversation with someone else. I say ingesting, listening to, training, whatever it might be. Like I was constantly just putting stuff in my brain, and there was a rebellious concept that kind of, not concept, effect that came out of that, which was, no, we're not going to learn this. We're not, I say I'm anthropomorphizing my mind. Like, no, you may have learned all that. We're not going to put it in place. Like there was something about trying to like learn. The answer is not necessarily more. The answer is not, oh, I need to accumulate more knowledge. I need to accumulate more, frameworks about things, right? It's really about being able to like sort out these important things and work on those. And well, what's important? Like, how do you know what's important, right? You can understand importance is important, but like, how do you know what, and even that's kind of like, well, how do you know importance? Well, we need to understand importance to even flesh that out. Anyway, I jumbled that whole little conversation up, but what I'm getting at is you need to let yourself have time to think properly and to make decisions. And when David said, like, you might want to visit this once a month, you may want to visit this once a day. You may want to give yourself an hour or two every day to think clearly.
Probably not going to be a bad thing. I would be shocked.
Yeah, it might be too much, but it might not be. And most of us don't do this. We haven't.
See, Earl Nightingale has a recommendation. He says 5 days a week, 1 hour a day. I'm gonna paraphrase it. You spend just asking yourself basically positive questions. 1 hour a day.
Which would be like, give some examples of what like a positive question would be.
What are some positive questions that I can ask myself that would be helpful?
There you go. I love it.
That's usually where I start. How can I move my business forward the most in the next month? How can I move my business forward the best or optimally over the next year? How can I develop and strengthen my relationship with my spouse? How can I create positive experiences with my children? What are some good priorities? How do I understand what's important? How do I understand what's true? All the questions we have down here. So you can just like, actually what I don't do this as much as I should, but when I do it, I try to start with what are some good questions? And then I ask those questions and then I go from there. You kind of can't do, like I said, you kind of can't do too much of this. Again, if it's all you did, I feel like you'd pretty quickly move to a different state.
Well, I think what you'd realize is that you'd start to hit on, hey, it's important for me to implement some things.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And so
eventually you ask the question.
Yeah, once that integrates, well, then you're going to do those things. Like you literally can't, I think what you said originally, I don't know that you could do this too much.
Yeah. Like
because
literally
I think it inherently triggers the action.
Correct behaviors. Yeah. And I think if you have never done it, then you're probably going to need more of it because you're going to have more issues and bottlenecks to work through.
Yeah.
As you have done it many times, at least based upon my experiences, I don't feel the need as much for it, but maybe that feeling is incorrect. So I need to go back to the drawing board and ask questions about whether or not that feeling is correct.
Yeah. Or
I do.
Yeah.
If I'm ever in a state of confusion, or if I have some big decisions and I really don't know what to do, I kind of go to this process. I go to the asking questions, asking the big questions, asking the little questions, asking all the questions as much.
Yeah, it may only take like a little question you ask or answer.
Yeah,
that opens a whole new world up. It's like,
this is so powerful. And it's not just, and Earl Nightingale points this out, it's not just the act of asking the questions and then that's the full effect you get. Your brain is constantly running, and by focusing on these specific questions for like an hour, your brain is still running through that in the background for days and if not months in advance. How many times have you thought about something or done something and then pop back in your brain like weeks later?
Repetitive thoughts. We're going to have to, we need to explore the nature of that. Like, so this is, you brought that up. Let me do a little interlude real quick, because it may, set the stage for a little bit more, but it may just be like, let's hit that. So it's like, I have a notebook, like a physical notebook that I write in a lot. I have it with me almost all the time. And I have done so for a long time now. And I wound up moving some books around, like on the bookshelf, and kind of tidying things up. And I found one from, it was from 2012, 2011. I think it was 2011, which was before I met my wife. So I was, I was single and all this kind of stuff. And there were, I say thoughts, there were like objectives that I wanted. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to spend another summer in Phoenix. Like, there were just things like that I was thinking about, that I was, I say like journaling. Back then I was doing a lot more journaling than what I do now, which is kind of using the notebook to ensure that I'm thinking accurately. That's kind of more what I do now.
Your priorities and your wants are more aligned with what you should want.
That's right. It's a way to get myself to kind of want those things that are going to be impactful and help me out. Yeah. And so what's very interesting is that there were many things that I wanted in 2011 that have not been achieved at all. And I'm completely happy with that. And they were big enough things in my life that I wrote them down. I'm like, this is absolutely top priority for me to do this. I was very wrong, because my life has gone in a direction that has been that it's much better now than it was then in a lot of ways. Now, here's the other interesting thing. There are also things that were in that kind of list or that exploration back in 2011 that I absolutely still want and that I've not achieved, and that actually are important.
Yeah.
And revisiting some of those and realizing, okay, wait, for now 9 years, I've had this repetitive, like, oh, I need to, oh, how could I, meaning that there was a question, there was a thought, there was something triggering this like desire. But I didn't take that and either dissolve it all the way where I realized it's not important, or get it to a point where I had enough clarity to achieve it and get it taken care of forever. So it's eaten up kind of my RAM, my processing power, for 9 years. And I don't think I'm unique in this way. I don't think I'm a special snowflake. Yeah.
I have old notebooks as well. And sometimes I run through it, and there's certain things that I wanted to do that, or goals or objectives that I did not achieve, due to sometimes maybe correctly, sometimes incorrectly. Sometimes something's a priority and then it's not a priority, and then you run back and you look back and you go, oh wait, I kind of forgot about that. I should be doing that, or I should have done that. And so this is where it's useful, because a lot of this is just kind of focusing on what's right, what's good for you and what you should be doing. So this is such a powerful process. Just like you said, I think you're right. You kind of can't do it too much, because at some point,
if you're doing it, so like doing it at all, you're going to get better at it, which means you're going to resolve times you're doing it wrong. And over time, that's going to then lead you to not make those mistakes.
Yeah.
And if you're not making those mistakes, at a certain point, you reach a threshold where action is clearly the important
all the
thing
answers
to do.
Are going to point towards action, right?
Yeah. It's almost like, oh wait, if you just have one thing, this is it.
Yeah. At least it leads to a lot of the other things.
Yeah, the other
If
things
not all
come
the other
from it.
things.
It's
Yeah.
like preparing the soil, so to speak.
Yeah.
It's like you don't make the plant grow, you create conditions where the plant grows on its own, right? You create conditions where like well, I kind of touch on a lot of these a lot of times, but I was blown away with like fasting for myself, like getting to a place where I'm not ingesting media and where I wasn't ingesting food. And like food, if you haven't done a fast, you don't realize how much food and your mind are just talking to you and influencing you on a regular basis.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Have you
Either
heard this
saying, "Oh,
study?
you're happy and you're awesome," or telling you that you're getting ready to kill yourself because you
Or
haven't
other
eaten
people
in
around you?
8 hours. It's wild.
Yeah.
And
Have you
so
heard the study of the judges and their leniency, like right after
after
lunch?
lunch,
Yep. Versus like,
no, I hadn't, but I was able to say,
yep.
was it after lunch?
It was actually the data. It was way stronger than you would think. Like
Wow.
their
Yeah.
leniency, their willingness to give people a break right after lunch was, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was substantial over a long period of data. Like much higher. I think it was something on the order of 70 to 80% difference.
Yeah.
Right after lunch versus, and I think the worst time was like right before lunch. So if you're gonna go to court and then your time is like 11 a.m. Show up late. I don't know. This is not legal advice.
Not late. Yeah.
But back to Fletch's point, your food and like what happens is kind of like the chemicals that your body gives you and the brain, what your brain is telling you, because it's kind of an evolutionary thing. Like, okay, you're hungry, go out there and get food. Go out there and do whatever you have to do, even if it's be grumpy, be hangry and stuff like that. And but that's a real thing.
Yeah.
So,
This was something that I think I can give advice to not eat for a while and to not ingest media. I don't think there's any legal restrictions on me giving that advice, but
I think it's a useful.
There's a strong likelihood that doing so will help you make some very to not only notice but experience to the point where it's like, oh, this is real. Some very important distinctions that may help you then transfer that into what we're kind of exploring and talking about, which is giving yourself some time where you're not being influenced by all this stuff to be able to, I don't say be alone with your thoughts, but to not have a bunch of other people's agendas
Yeah.
being kind of wrecking you and taking you out of the depth you need to be in to see these things clearly. That's maybe as much like that's kind of a takeaway for this, right?
Yeah.
Like engineering things, and it's like you don't even know that you want to engineer it until you realize, well, why would I want to engineer it versus just go with the flow? And it's like, oh, I can, let's explore that in a way where it's like, if you're going with the flow, you're letting yourself be at the complete mercy,
basically a wild animal,
of other people's agendas, right? And other people's, just because like marketing, right, it rules the world. It just does. Other people's agendas are being forced on you all the time in Western society. Just period. They are.
Yep. And all societies.
In all, yeah, maybe. There may be some like indigenous hunter gatherers that operate in a way that isn't that, but regardless, for the most part, any developed civilization is kind of being driven by
of other people's agendas is a useful activity. It'll help you focus on these big questions.
Yeah. And what you wind up being able to see, like if you Myron Golden, do you know Myron Golden, David?
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, he's I met him in Franklin, Tennessee, a couple times ago, a couple years ago. Mm-hmm. He does stuff with ClickFunnels and Brunson, but he had this thing where I'm trying to look around. I I don't. This is maybe not going to be that impactful. Anyways, taken from Myron, you can envision this for yourself. It wouldn't really work necessarily with the camera anyway, but he's like, he holds up like a penny, right? And he's like, and then he has like $100 bill. He's like, well, like how is this like people trying to grab pennies, so to speak? Meaning they're focusing on these things that are going to bring you just minuscule, tiny little results in your life. How in the world can this penny cover up your vision of the big picture, like this $100 bill, right? And it's like, there's no way. He moves it around. He's like, where do you hover? He's like, here's how it works. And he moves the penny real close to his eye, and he can't see the $100 bill at all, right? And so this is what people do: is they move their attention on these little things really close to themselves, and they're only operating on that stuff. Mm-hmm. And you lose the ability to see, whoa, what's really going on here?
The big important stuff.
And moving from thing to thing to thing, shiny object, shiny object, shiny object, program to program to program, marketing, advertisement. All you're doing is keeping your vision completely obscured, obfuscating the big win, because you don't give yourself some time and some space to get those pennies out of the way and look at these things that really are more impactful. Did that?
Yeah, no. I think that's
okay.
That's useful. Yeah. So, I mean, it's a really, I think that's an apt analogy. There's tons of minor things that people focus on. They major in minor things, instead of majoring in major things.
I've heard people say that. I think it's a very, apt.
Yeah. Which is why you need the questions to figure out what is the minor thing and what is the major thing. That's what the questions really help you with.
The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing.
Right. We do have a whole list of scenarios and different, different tools, strategies, and perspectives that we haven't looked at yet. That you kind of, I would say, you run scenarios with. So the kind of the lens here is this path or this path or this path or that path or whatever. We're gonna go over those in just a second, but also wanted to point out you want to directly compare different paths, new paths and old paths and stuff like that. So, for example, like in house hunting, you can compare specific aspects: 4-bedroom versus 5-bedroom. Maybe one's more than other. Money versus money, and that doesn't mean that has to be each individual factor. Has to be the end. You have to pick one factor and that's it. But you just kind of outlining and really intellectual, looking at intellectually, okay, so what's important to me? So now I can look at the individual factors and kind of extract those out and see, okay, is this something, does this meet what I want it to meet? Does this meet like kind of minimum thresholds, which is something I talked about. So some kind of potential perspectives and tools and strategies here. Again, you run by the big questions. There's minimum thresholds. So like with kids, there's a certain amount of money that you need to make in order to meet your obligations, right? And so certain jobs are kind of eliminated, and in that sense, they can meet all these they can be great in every single other way. But if they don't meet sort of like a minimum threshold, then that could be a major issue with that path. And there's I have a whole list of, kind of tools or strategies or perspectives that you can look here. And I think we've kind of interwoven a lot of these, like future projection. It's something I use a lot. We talked about trends analysis before. That's very useful. One thing to note of, that Fletcher and I talked about was sort of like new challenges, how important it is to get new challenges. I want to talk about my job, that my last day job over here to the left. You can see I felt like I was getting dumber every year because I was kind of doing the same things and it wasn't really engaging like my thought. And in a lot of ways it's easier at first because it's like, okay, I don't really have to think about it, but ultimately it's just kind of is boring and it kind of is draining physically and emotionally. So Fletch, you had a job. What was your job working on a trail?
Well, there's a couple different ways I used to do trail work. When I was a park ranger with Colorado State Parks, we designed and built a trail at a place called Steamboat Lake State Park. And so that was the first kind of application of that. But then I think probably what you're remembering is that I used to hike into a wilderness area to check commercial outfitters compliance with like safety and environmental health regulations. So, making sure that they had porta potties and things like that. And so the actual day-to-day work I did physically was hiking like 12 miles into and out of a canyon.
Which sounds fan-freaking-tastic, and I bet it was great at first.
It was great sporadically, but day in, day out, there was a monotony to it that I really was not like kind of growth and development, like kind of what you're talking about. I was getting stupider every year. I didn't necessarily feel like I was getting stupider every year, but I knew I was getting older every year. And and I didn't really see what I was doing really building me more to work with, developing more that I could use to build, to work and get somewhere other than that. And that's not to say that, end of the day, maybe I could have stayed doing that every day and been very happy with it. I'm not saying I couldn't have, but there was stuff in me that I was like, well, I really want to go do this other thing. And so being occupied in that manner, which was people spend thousands of dollars to do, right? Intermittently with the hiking, I would also float the Whitewater River, the Gunnison River, and is a 2-day float. And in the middle of it, I got to sleep in a teepee that we had on a beach in a wilderness area. It's like, okay, you just described what people spend thousands of dollars to do, and you got to do it every day. Yes, I did. I got paid for it. By the, I say, I like to not say the government paid me. They didn't. Taxpayers did. That's also not true. We can get into that as well. But regardless, describing that seems great. Getting to one of the things that came to mind, somewhere in there, maybe the third or fourth year, Apple created the iPod, and I got an iPod, and I loaded that iPod with audiobooks, and everything changed. For the first while, all those hikes that had been kind of humdrum, now kind of, they weren't, I say humdrum, they weren't. That's why I say there's intermittent times when it was just, everything was right. And I was really in the flow of the hike or the river or whatever it might be. But being able to, I guess, feel like I was learning, right? Feel like I was developing, like I was getting some new information while I was on those hikes, shifted that experience quite a bit. So is there a place you were going with that I didn't take it, David?
I think that when you look at a path, you don't want, I think the kind of a default thought that people have is you want an easy path to victory, to success. And that is actually not what is going to be fulfilling to most people. You should expect challenges. Pretty much any path that you go on, there's going to be challenges. It's not going to be easy. And for me, and I think for a lot of people, also evaluating a path is like, okay, not just new challenges, but ongoing challenges. So in our business, there's ongoing challenges. There's ongoing things that we can learn, ongoing new things that we can do. That's one of the best things about my current career is there's always more to learn. I'm constantly learning new things, constantly testing new things. There's so many different things that I can do on a day-to-day basis. I think and I think this is kind of what goes to a human need of not having autonomy. I mean, not having monotony. And so really thinking about that, I think is helpful in evaluating the quality of a path, because I think this is going to be pretty universal in terms of, people getting bored. So there's probably going to be some people that could walk the trail without the audiobooks for 40 years of their life. Maybe, and if that's you, that's fine. I mean, but be aware this is a very real thing, that your brain needs novel experiences in order to be happy as effectively. So that's where I was going with that.
Yeah. Novels. Well, yeah, novels and interest. As we were kind of talking about that word came up, and there's whole like novel coronavirus thing, and I was thinking like novel, like in kind of just common culture. This is a total side note, but the like novel means like new and unique.
Mm-hmm.
And when you were talking about exploring, like, well, there's constant challenges, so to speak, right? In a business, and so I'm like, well, is that true? Like that. One of the things I continue to ask myself is like, oh, is that true? I was like, well, there are, but what's the nature of that, right? Why are there constant things that we need to learn and grow? And it's almost like, well, because the mind over time gets somewhat oblivious to the same thing over and over and over and over again, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so unless there's something new and novel, we tend not to notice it. Well,
yep.
Okay, if that's the case, then if you're doing exactly the same thing as you've done forever in your business, you may wind up becoming invisible to your market.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so anyway, that was just a little novel, something that I've come to realize. We were talking about the trail. Like there were days when I came home from work and I didn't remember anything that I had done that day.
Yeah.
Why? Well, because it was so much like the day before it.
This is a deep concept that has a lot of science behind it, because they look at like the people that end up getting Alzheimer's, and the people that have all the indications that should get Alzheimer's that don't get Alzheimer's when they get old, or other sort of like memory diseases. There's the most common thread for the people who, if somehow didn't get it, is learning and trying new things well into life. And if you are doing the same thing that you've been doing for 40 years, and you keep doing it, or you just sit in front of the TV all day, watching the same shows or whatever, and you don't have novel experiences, you don't try new things, you don't build new skills and stuff like that well into your life, you're much more likely to degrade, not just your brain, but the whole rest of your body. So this is a very real thing. So that's part of what I think you should use, a lens or a filter that you should try to, when you're looking at the future, a potential path. Don't avoid new challenges. Seek them out, and conquer them. And that's going to be great for you in all sorts of different ways. To me, also, autonomy or freedom. This is actually, I think I was looking up a list of like kind of human needs, and some psychology thing. And this is actually a pretty substantial category of human needs. Like, for example, in my job, being told to do stupid stuff that I thought was like, it was pointless, or like busy work. That really sucks. For me in particular, I think for most people as well, I that really gets me going. That really makes me upset. Just to think that someone can tell me, okay, you got to do this, go do this stupid thing. I know it's not really very helpful or worth much, but you got to do it anyway. Sorry, it's just part of the rules, or part of whatever, part of this thing. That is just not fun. Not fun is not the right way to put it. It's not satisfying. It doesn't create happiness. It's just wasteful. I mean, how many people want to do things that are pointless in their life? I mean, I don't think most people seek that out.
Like for you, does it make you feel like you're kind of just a cog, right? You're just a machine. Like if I'm just doing something that I don't see as important, then what am I actually doing this for?
Yeah, honestly, I think that being a cog in a machine isn't always necessarily a bad thing. I think it's more that just if you were a cog in a machine that wasn't used, like a cog that was not useful in a machine, that would be, I think, a closer analogy, at least at that moment when you're doing those tasks.
It's not related to the production of the thing that you see the machine.
Exactly.
Its purpose.
If you're a critical piece of a machine, that's actually not such a bad thing, because you at least feel like you're accomplishing something. And not having the choice, that's what the autonomy is. It's like being able to choose your work. I get to choose my work. If I don't want to do something, I either don't do it, I tell somebody no, or I pass it off onto somebody else, or maybe I delay it. But I get to choose. I get to choose my work. If it's something's interesting to me, I get to follow it. And this is a huge thing. If you look at like the intrinsic motivation, which is sort of like the, what there's a drive inside us. One of the strongest motivating factors in human beings is the kind of intrinsic curiosity, the desire to explore things. And not being able to have the time or the choice to explore those things is that is something that's super important to me personally, and I think is important to a lot of people when they really look at it.
Yeah, there's there's a lot of psychologists and things that have those frameworks. There's one that when you brought that up, like Tony Robbins has like the 6 human needs or something, and they're kind of paired up with something that's the opposite, right? So you have like a desire to be autonomous, but we have a desire for connection. Like those kind of things, they almost go in pairs in his framework. I'm not saying those are true, but it when you mentioned that, it kind of came up, and so I think the nature of that is there's probably something to it, right? I think a lot of what Tony talks about is really helpful, and a lot of very astute observations about things, and thinking that we do want autonomy. I think there's probably also say a need or a desire or drive in a lot of people to be connected to somebody else or something else, right? Those are they're not contradictory. They're kind of paradox. We have to find a way to accomplish both of those in ways to or at least address what, like how those come up.
Find a balance.
Something, right?
Yeah.
We have to kind of I just mentioned that because the way that was phrased, I was like, oh, that sounds a lot like something that I recall.
Yeah, Tony Robbins has, if I understand correctly, he has some actual psychology training, and he uses it a lot in his my wife's a psychologist, and I talked to her about Tony Robbins. She was like, oh, that's blank, blank, blank. These techniques that she immediately recognized.
Yeah, he's got a lot of background in neuroassociative conditioning and neurolinguistic programming. As well as maybe a lot of other. He's partnered up with some psychologists and psychiatrists as well that I've watched some material from him.
So another point I want to make, and I think this is really not talked about enough in our society in general, and it's kind of your focus. This goes back to what's important. This goes back to your priorities. This goes back to having only a certain amount of time and energy to do stuff. To me, any path you take, I gotta put a little caveat here. There needs to be a significant focus in it, right? It's pretty hard to be like a super generalist and to live a super fulfilling life, accomplish a lot of things. It's not impossible, but there needs to be a central theme, I think, to any path that you take. And then you need to also be able to stick with it. So typically people try to go more broad, especially with a business. They try to kind of be all things to all people. That's not really a reasonable path for the most part, or it's a much longer, more difficult path than to me, what would be a more narrow path. But then also another part of that is not just focusing on it. Like this month, I'm only going to work on this part of my business, but also well into the future, kind of sticking with something. This to me is super important. So the way I would look at this is like, when you look at a path, can you do this path for the next like 5 to 10 years? If that is a super depressing thought to you, well, first of all, explore that. But if that's a true, correct feeling, and that you really wouldn't want to do this thing for more than like a few months, then I would say that would be a path that you probably don't want to walk down at all. This is not always true. There are exceptions, obviously, but in general, I think this is one filter that you can look at it. And so for me, I look at Dallas SEO Geek. I've been doing that for a really long time. I looked at SEO. I knew it was going to be around a long time. And I could see myself, I was very interested in it. I could see myself studying it for a very long time. And also when I really got successful was when I narrowed my focus as well with SEO. I was doing other forms of marketing, and then I narrowed it to SEO, and almost immediately my business started being much more successful. I know that, Fletch, you might have actually a different perspective on this. What do you think about what I just said?
I guess I'd start with, at any given time, you really can only see one thing, right? You can only be working on one thing at a time. It doesn't necessarily mean that in the course of a 24-hour period or, 7 days, that you don't allocate resources to multiple things, right? We talked about that a little bit earlier. Like I look at like, okay, so what's actually like, what is true? Like what has to be true almost? Well, at any time you're thinking about one thing, even if it goes one thing, like in circles back around and we have repetitive, at any given moment, you've got one thing, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, that's true. Okay. So now if that's true, then what else are we left with? We see effects in life coming from exceeding thresholds, right? Once we have a certain amount of energy into a system, a chemical reaction can take place. Once we have a certain amount of money, I no longer need money from other people. Once I have a certain amount of health, I can work and do activity. Once I've eliminated a certain amount of, bad or contradictions in my own belief system or whatever, wow, now everything's easier and I'm not, undermining my own success at any given time, right? And so we can also see that like, oh, yeah, that's how a lot of things work anyway. I'm not saying everything, but a lot of things work that way. So we need to then understand, well, okay, what thresholds do I need to achieve? Like where are those thresholds? It's quite possible that because your mind works on one thing at a time, and that there are an infinite number of things that it can focus on, nearly infinite, that you'll need to make a decision, which means a choice where you clearly see that's not where I want to go, over here is, so that you can allocate that focus to get over the threshold where you get the result that you want.
Yeah,
that's the model, right?
Yeah, no, that's really good.
And so it's always one thing, like at any given time. But getting back, it's like there's a fractal or like a hologram where at any given resolution, this is just how things work. You can look at it, you take a step back and say, my whole life or a given day. But it's because that at any given second or moment, that's all that really can happen. And as we understand that I need to get enough effect to achieve a lot of thresholds, right? A lot of phenomenon in life are above a threshold, right? Biologically, chemically speaking, right? If you're above that threshold, you're alive. If you're below it, you're not.
Yeah.
There are a lot of phenomena in life. There's thresholds. Okay.
Yeah, no, it's very true.
Well, we need to make sure we put enough resources into things that we not only get above the threshold, but stay there.
Yeah.
And so that's really the nature of the nature of deciding, okay, these are important things, and this is where I'm going to allocate my resources because I've only got the 24 hours in a day.
But it's wasteful to not allocate some, but not enough to meet the threshold that you need.
You're truly, yes, that's poor strategy.
Yeah.
To spend, so it's like, well, how many hours a day should I spend trying to build my business? As much as it takes. Some people it might take 20 minutes. Some people it may take 20 hours. I don't know. Neither do you.
Yeah.
But if it's something that you have uncovered in your life as an important thing, that's a threshold you need to achieve. Finding a way to focus on it and work on questions. Like it's possible that you could spend 20 hours a day trying to build your business, but not asking questions this way, and you never can get over that threshold. You may need help. You may need other resources you don't currently have. And so that's why understanding how to think properly, like, okay, what's a failure condition? A failure condition may be that you're trying to build an online business and you don't understand anything about business, right? Well, yeah, but I'm building content every day. if you don't understand content, that may not be enough.
Yeah.
This is the nature to me of what we, of something that would be very helpful if more people understood.
And
it's helped me a lot.
Man, there's so much good in that. I really like that. I think that putting some extra context here of like looking at like you're, especially when it comes to building a business, you're building a substantial thing. This is not a small thing. This is something that is to me typically like a pretty big thing. There's lots of moving parts to a business typically, and there's quite a few different pieces that, and you're kind of moving towards what I would consider to be sort of like a pretty substantial goal. And to meet that goal, there's a lot of things that you need to do. And so jumping around from thing to thing or trying to run 2 or 3 different businesses right out of the gate, it's going to be way less efficient. And so when you're considering the path, I'm going to walk both paths. No, you can't walk both paths. You walk one path. It is possible temporarily, like if you need to keep working your current job, you can work a side gig. But I think should be a temporary thing, and it shouldn't generally be. I know some people are successful with it, but for me, it wasn't. I can only focus on so many things. So distractible. So I basically, in order for me to really be successful, really figure out my business, I had to quit my job. And so that was critical to me. And so that was part of my decision-making process. But yeah, meeting certain thresholds. It's sort of like if you want to live in this part of town, so you start building a house, you get a third through it. Oh, now you want to live in this other place. You leave that there. You do it again somewhere else. You do it again somewhere else. You go somewhere else. You have 5 houses. None of them have beat the threshold of a house you can actually live in. You spend all this time and energy starting to build the house, and it's very inefficient. It's kind of what I think a lot of people are doing. You got to stick with it long enough to meet the thresholds, and to build a true profitable business. It's a pretty high threshold in most cases.
Well, if you don't have a profitable business, then it's higher than you are currently.
Right. You're not there yet.
That, right. And maybe you're not there because you are high. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you got to look at, right. We'll play on words.
Good one.
Yeah.
Man, there's so much in here. There's the true cost analysis. Oh my goodness. I think we went into a lot of this in the trends one. Mm-hmm. So I would kind of really look at like, what does it really cost to do certain things? What price are you really paying by A, taking this path, and B, not taking these other paths?
Yeah. Is it, like these next couple like items there, it's like, is it worth it to do that? Right. That's kind of the nature of those questions. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not going to go too much detail on that, but really try to look at like kind of the cost and benefit.
Which is like, okay, if I don't know how to answer that question, then you need to answer the question. Well, how would I understand that question? Like, how would I decide if something's worth it?
Yeah.
Like, this is the nature of those positive questions. This is something you can do if you allocate some time to understanding these things. Right? If you don't know how to answer those questions, figure out how to answer those questions.
Right. Go through the process we outlined before. To me, this was really huge. This next one, the growth queue, building and maintaining. So what does this mean? This is a list of skills and trainings that give me that work on those skills, and not just trainings, but also maybe tasks or testing or projects that work on skills that help me move towards my objectives, which helps me build my business towards kind of like a single overarching set of intertwined goals. Okay, so that was a long thing. So basically, usually about once every quarter, I take a look at what are the skills that I want, what are the experiences that I want, that I need to help me move forward in my business. Are there currently trainings out there that help me towards this? Or that I have, or that I need to buy, or that I need to spend time working on? And, this is going to be useful for, okay, there's certain things that I just haven't been focusing on. Oh yeah, but that's really important. That really helps me move forward all these different parts of my business in an impactful way. I think this is something that will also protect you from a lot of the FOMO, a lot of the other marketing out there, because what will happen is someone will market something to you and it will be the best product. Let's say, assume it's the best product of the world for this specific skill set or this specific set of actions, but it's not really relevant to your goals or your priorities. You can easily eliminate it and say, oh, well, I don't really need this because it's not important. At the same time, it can help you evaluate sort of the true value of some courses. Some courses I look at, I'm like, oh my God, this is so incredibly valuable to me because I know where I want to build, where I want to grow. So this is like personal development. Where do I want to go? Do you have thoughts on that, Fletch?
Yeah, I think the one of the tool that you and I each employ with search, understanding search engines, in a way, one of the reasons we value it so much, meaning the utility it has, when you've identified something in your life, which includes your business, things you need there, being able to go out and find it is a very revolutionary concept in communication technology.
Mm-hmm.
The promise of a search engine is null and void if you don't know how to decide what to look for.
Yeah.
So for a search engine to truly have benefit, you need to know what to type in, what to look for. And so I see what you described there being you're making the decisions. You're looking at the situation you're in, the scenario, where those, what the next thing I need to work on is, right? Those are not inherently things someone else can give you, right? It may be that somebody else understands what you need to have in place if you want to build a sellable business, for instance. I know this is a project that you're working on, right? Is courses to help people understand what they need to do to sell a business. So you can give that to someone, but unless they know that being able to exit a business is important to them, they're not going to necessarily be as receptive to the value of it. So if somebody's already in Google, just say Google, right? And they're typing a question, a lot has already taken place.
Yeah, that's true.
To get them to that point, right? And so it's like, well, if they never get to that point, then what's the purpose? What's the purpose in ranking for a keyword that doesn't get searched, right? It may be the most important damn thing on the planet. Nobody's looking for it.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, they're like, how does that really work? You may have to create demand for your own thing. How do you do that? Well, maybe you rank for other keywords. Maybe people are looking for how to be successful when at the core, they need to realize how to answer a question properly. Well, not many people go to Google with a question of how to answer a question. There's kind of, I'm just circling back around a lot of different ways on,
oh my God,
like how do you decide?
Now I'm going to go put a bunch of weird questions into Google and see what it says.
I have done that many times. Yeah.
Sounds like fun.
Well, that's the thing I realized. I mean, I kind of dug into with search as I got more and more into the thinking about like what this technology is. And I realized that you could have just a veritable gold mine of information that's even indexed and potentially ranking in Google for stuff that never gets searched. It's not really going to transform things. At the same time, you can have umpteen million people look for, Taylor Swift's new album or whatever it might be. And those might be that kind of immediate entertainment fix, which makes people feel good. Doesn't really change their life that much over the long term.
Hard disagree. Taylor Swift changes lives.
Yeah. Blank space video completely helped me understand there was a new dream car that I wanted.
So I think like when you're looking at like identifying a path, think about the skills that you'll need. Now, maybe you probably at first won't know all the skills, but at least to get started, like if you're looking to start your own business, you're going to need to develop some sales skills. It's just there's almost no way around it. It's not completely 100% true, but by and large, you're going to need to develop sales skills. If you're going to look to do search engine optimization, you're going to want to develop search engine optimization skills. And there's a lot of kind of subcategories in there. So really think about like the queue that you're building on your path. I'm sorry, the growth queue, the things that you need to learn in the places where people who have done that before and been successful with that, who are you going to learn from? Be it Fletch or me, or well, that's about it. That you got to learn
short list.
Fletcher.
That's a short list.
Yeah, it's a short list. Guaranteed to get something genuine and real from us, I think. Fletch mentioned this early on. Take single steps. This is a nice, pretty simple technique. Another way to look at this that is helpful for me is at any point, like you look at like, okay, I want to build a business and make a bunch of money with it. Okay, so that's one kind of big task. You break it down into smaller tasks, into smaller and smaller. Technically, every little thing can be broken down into task sets. Even typing a word on a computer is a task set because I have to type every letter. Even typing a single letter is a task set. So to me, whenever something seems overwhelming, I go into OneNote and I start breaking down the individual tasks, and then I'll have subtasks underneath those and subtasks. And at some point, they're so if at some point those it no longer seems, even if it's a long list, it's still like, oh, it's itemized. There's just little things that I need to do, and this is actual work that helps. And sometimes if you know you can only do part of it, you do part of it, and you know what your next things are, because a lot of what seems big is sort of like not really, is having vagueness to the exact steps that you need to take. So taking single steps, but outlining those if it seems overwhelming is going to be useful.
Yeah, the OneNote. You're on OneNote. I use Evernote in my notebook. The value in doing that, our mind is able to jump ahead tons of steps. It's kind of like one thing happens and this other thing happens and this other thing happens, and then magic happens and I get my goal, right? Our mind is able to kind of our mind fills in the blanks. You're watching a movie. The movie's not moving. There's huge gaps in each frame, and our mind fills all that in.
Yeah.
So all that points to is our mind is very capable of jumping ahead and not saying, wait a second, what happens between here and here? When you write it down or even type it out, but when you've got it and you're like, wait, there's something that happens between this part where I'm ranking in Google and where I'm retired on the beach. But when you're reading someone's sales letter, it may seem like all you need to do is to be able to rank, and then you can be on the beach. That's not true. There's there's some stuff in the middle there. And
just
when
buy my product next day,
and then magic happens, so to speak, right? It's a push button, and I'm done. If I could just afford to pay to push that button, I'd be done. Maybe that's true. I haven't seen a product like that, but
it's not. Spoiler alert.
Yeah. Well, questions are almost like that, but it costs a lot, so to speak. It takes a lot of resources to get to the point where you're actually pushing that button. So anyway, I just wanted to reiterate my understanding of the value in using a device to help catch your mind when it jumps ahead a lot of steps with either vagueness, which like a lack of clarity, or somehow or another after we get married, then all my life is great. It's like, whoa, wait a second. Like, that's not necessarily true, right? After I go on this date, then my love life will be fixed. After I rank number 1 in Google, then my business is going to be just forever and always wonderful.
Right.
It's like, wait, I can realize, saying that, just like I want to laugh at myself. It's like,
right.
Except that my mind has done each of those specific things. Absolutely has done those. So it's like, well, okay, thank you. Thank you we need to laugh at my brain. It's silly a lot of times.
I've done the same thing. So.
Yeah.
So,
so it's like, well, if that happens, then can we see the value in noticing when that happens, the difference between noticing when that happens so that you can make sure that you account for and take the proper steps or understand they're needing to be taken versus, oh, well, magic happens and I get there. Like, it's much more valuable. It's much better to know the distinctions, the clarity, those elements. So do that one. That's the nature of a distinction. I definitely want to make the decision to be on that side. Okay, now we've made a decision today, right? You definitely want to be on the side where we have enough clarity to see the path.
One step at a time. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
I've never eaten an elephant, disclaimer. But it seems like that would be the reasonable course of action.
Right. Okay, so we've gone on for about an hour and a half now. There's so much more we could talk about, but I kind of want to wrap it up. I want to point out that this list here is definitely not exhaustive. There's so many different ways you could go about this. But I also want to point out a couple of things that you might, to me, that I was thinking about, okay, what are some things that maybe aren't very useful that I think a lot of people might put a lot of weight on? Like your previous experiences. So you might say, I've been a lawyer my whole life. I can't go and be an artist. I don't know. I'm just pulling something random out. Well, that's just not true. Our brains are so able to adapt and do new things that if you really want to do it, or if it's really something that is a good path for you to take going forward, you'll adjust and you'll figure it out, and you'll learn to do what you need to learn. Not that previous experiences can't help you smooth the transition. My career change was pretty different. There wasn't really as much overlap as you might think. And so I think that I wouldn't be like, oh, well, I've never done that before, so therefore I can't take that path. No, don't do that. That's not a useful way of looking at things. One more that came to mind, and I'm sure that there's more, maybe Fletch can think of some. I think this is a pretty common excuse, is kind of like thinking about natural inclinations. Now, yes, maybe some people they can't play in the NBA. You're 5 feet tall and you weigh $105. You're probably not going to make it in the NBA or as an NFL linebacker. But in general, I think people lean on this way too heavily. Oh, I'm not a technology person, so I can't do SEO. You don't need to be a technology person. Again, you're a human being who's with a functioning brain that's able to learn and adjust. So don't worry about in high school, the counselor said I wasn't good with technology or whatever. Just ignore all that stuff and just move forward and do the best you can and growing and getting better, and you'll get there faster than most people.
That's a big one, David. One of the things I actually jotted down a few minutes ago, we were talking about skills, right? Developing skills, how those differ from abilities, right? Like Henry Ford didn't have the skill to build, to run, a pop rivet, in the frame of a Model T or, whatever. Like, he wasn't necessarily on the line doing the things, but he understood the need to develop the ability to get that stuff done. Right. And so if you're 5 feet tall and weigh $105 and love the NBA, your path to the NBA may be buying a team. It may be becoming a coach. It may be in working with as a trainer for people. Yeah. They're just, developing like the understanding, skills, and ability. There's some kind of little dance that those concepts do. I've identified MBA as important, right? For me, for whatever reason. I'm not saying it is, but just if that's something that you uncover in your life, okay, well, how's this going to work? Right? Maybe it is as a player, maybe it isn't. But if you want to be a salesperson and you're unable to speak and you want to do it face to face, there might be some very physical limitations to your ability, right? You may be a great copywriter. You may be
not common. This is not the standard thing, in my opinion. Most skills that you will need to go on any path you choose, you can develop. I would be willing.
You can develop to the point where you're over the threshold of what you need to achieve the thing that you want.
Yep.
Yeah.
there are. I brought up like the NBA is sort of like there are some exceptions, right? There are some exceptions that you just are not gonna, be able to do, usually due to like physical tasks that within physical limitations, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if a really common one is also like, oh, I'm not a salesperson. I'm not, or there's kind of the reverse of that, or the flip side of that, where they're like, oh, he's a natural born salesperson. That bugs me to no end, because there's so much misunderstanding, I think, in just saying that and truly believing that someone is a natural born salesperson. I think is not correct. It's most people, well, they've developed skills one way or another. And they're not born to sell. And even if you
Although I
believe
think
that,
there's a book called Born to Sell.
even if you believe that you don't have the ability, I promise you, if you're willing to put in the work and energy, you'll be able to meet the threshold to get people to say yes. Promise you, it is a skill that can be developed by just about anybody.
Yeah, and I think that the nature of all of this starts with understanding, like understanding how to understand sales or
Understanding how
influence.
to understand. How do you know what's true versus what's false versus what maybe can't be known or what's unknown?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Well, thanks, Fletch. This has been great. I enjoyed
We
this
covered
one.
a lot of territory. I think we're going to probably be pulling again, like we always do. We open up a whole bunch and then we circle back around. It's like, let's explore this concept a little bit more. But I think we hit on some really impactful things today that we'll continue to develop and explore.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us, and I hope you have a great day. We'll listen. You'll listen to us next time.
Yeah, sounds good. That works.